Daily Fantasy Sports, the global state of the union. Speaker, Jeffrey Haas, Chief International Officer, DraftKings.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeffrey Haas. I'm the Chief International Officer of DraftKings, and it's a pleasure to be here in Malta today to speak at the first European Fantasy Sports Summit. Thank you all for your time and coming to hear what we have to say. There we go. So DraftKings was founded in 2012, and it took us about 5 years to become an overnight success. As of today, we have about 9.2 million registered customers playing on our platform, the vast majority of which are playing in North America. We have about 100,000 registered in Europe, and we're starting to see some good growth there. We launched into Europe in February of 2016 with a start in the UK, and our intent was to grow our business there as a base outside of North America, and then see where we could grow organically from there. We were fortunate to receive one of the first controlled skill game licenses from the MGA in January of this year, and we launched in a number of European markets in February, and then expanded to a few other ones in September. As you can see from these numbers, we're a significant business and looking to grow. Our intent is to be the biggest and best daily fantasy sports operator in the world. We achieve that goal, or we've come where we are today, through focus. And it's really a single-minded focus on providing a great customer experience. And for us, that's important for every step of the way, from the moment a player lands onto our website or into our app, registers for an account, starts playing, and then has the opportunity to win money can't buy experiences, like the opportunity to play on the pitch at Anfield Stadium. If you're a Liverpool fan, that's an extraordinary prize to have made available to you through a platform like this. Through our growth, we have had a few existential challenges on the way. We have no shortage of media coverage, thanks to some wonderful media around the world. In 2015, we were challenged by a few jurisdictions in the United States in respect to the legality of DFS, and we were able to overcome some of those challenges. More recently, this summer, we sought to merge with the other significant operator in America, and that merger was not approved by the FTC. Nevertheless, we showed resilience and have endured and come out quite successful through these challenges. The biggest challenge people have been aware of around DFS has been in respect to the legislative uncertainty in America in particular. That's the lion's share of our business. That's where most of the industry does its business today across the majority of the US. And the challenges in 2015 were in respect to, is it possible for this business to endure given some of the questions around this? So in light of that, we've sought to pursue discussions with various legislators and regulators around America and in time around the world in order to explain our category to them, what the distinctions are between daily fantasy sports and sports betting and other forms of gaming, and to work with them to try to help inform very deliberate, intelligent, intentful decisions around good regulatory frameworks for us to operate. In 2017, there's been quite a bit of momentum in respect to the advancement of legislation in respect to daily fantasy sports. But if I were to show you the all-time legislative progress in the United States over the last 2.5 years, you'll see that 18 different states across the US today have legislation in place which seeks to govern and regulate daily fantasy sports. And you'll see that there are quite a few other states that are in various stages of the legislative process in order to pass bills to put a regulatory structure in place. And this is important for us because without this clarity of regulation, it's difficult for us to operate and advertise, acquire customers, and really build our business. And it's wonderful to see what's happened in America in particular. The three key points I want to talk about today are daily fantasy sports internationally, what our category does to engage fans as well as sports around the world, and innovation, which is something that is critical to our business in order to ensure that we continue to grow over time, bring new customers on, and the various operators in the room and DraftKings have an opportunity to compete for a larger share of the pie. So in respect to international, one of the biggest challenges we had going into the United Kingdom was that the moniker DFS, the acronym for Daily Fantasy Sports, is known in the UK as a sofa store. And for us to start using that label, it caused some real challenges. So what we found, not only in the UK, but a variety of other markets, is we use the daily manager games instead. In Germany in particular, if you're active in that market, that's the label you want to use as opposed to DFS or Daily Fantasy Sports, because people understand more intuitively what that is. If you talk about the numbers for market size of DFS, not only in North America, but in the UK and around the world, you'll see that there are almost 60 million people playing forms of fantasy sports in the United States and Canada. This is as per an FSTA study. And while that has been the largest market around the world, we have seen through our work that there's quite a few other large populations of fantasy sports players in other jurisdictions. In the UK, we know there's about 8.5 million season-long fantasy football players primarily, and that's the media rights the media companies and the rights holders primarily who operate those businesses. So you have the Premier League itself with about 3.5 million players on their platform. You have the Sun's Dream Team with about 2 million. You also have the Telegraph and Mail and a variety of other media companies with their own businesses. So you have about 8.5 million people playing season long, and to date about 100,000 people who are playing the daily variant, which means there's a tremendous market opportunity. We have it incumbent on us to educate the audience and tell them about our product, why it's fun to play, and why they should consider engaging with the daily fantasy sports platform instead of season long. We also know that with season long, people tend to lose their interest very quickly. After about 6 or 7 weeks, more than 3/4 of the players on a season-long platform have become disengaged. With daily fantasy sports, that's much stickier. But there's also this line at the bottom over here about across Europe and in the rest of the world, how big are the populations of fantasy sports players? Well, we know from our work in Germany, there's probably 2 million plus players there on a season-long basis, and in other parts of the world, it's quite significant. But our research also gives us some really wonderful specifics in respect to daily fantasy sports and how it is burgeoning not only outside of North America, but also outside of Europe. And there are some companies doing an extraordinary job there today. In Yvonne's intro earlier, he talked about daily fantasy sports in India. There's a company there called Dream 11 who is doing extraordinary business today. The number of registered players are in the many millions. And there's also Moneyball 9, who are based in Australia, but also operating in India. So India is a hotspot for daily fantasy sports. Australia is as well, with 3 significant operators. In Asia, many people are not aware of this, but daily fantasy sports is something that is entrenched and growing. There's a wonderful company in Taiwan called FantasyPK.com, who have a great product, looks very similar to DraftKings, but with traditional Chinese language on it. And we see as well across Europe and into Latin America, there's a variety of other operators. I think that if you're looking for the opportunities beyond just North America and how to grow our businesses and our industry and that pie of players who want to play, if you take an international view, you recognize that there's a tremendous number of opportunities out there for all of us. I also wanted to give you a quick view of 2 of the sites. So this is FantasyPK.com out of Taiwan, who have a really great product out here. And they run a lot of competitions around NBA. I don't know if you're aware, the 2 biggest sports in Taiwan are basketball and baseball, and they have a robust site around that. This next one is Dream11.com out of India. And these guys are doing a fantastic job around daily fantasy cricket, which is the majority of their business today, but they also have daily fantasy, a few of the other domestic sports, and they also recently announced a partnership with the NBA for India. And so I know that they're doing a lot around them this season. So it's great to see that a lot of people are investing time, money, resources in order to establish businesses in this space and start growing. And if we're talking about what the opportunities are for us globally, and we take that international view, we recognize that there's a lot of very interesting things going on. We talk about the international growth challenges. While we have received a license in Malta, and it has allowed us to go into quite a few different markets across Europe, we're also finding that there are challenges in respect to speaking to legislators and regulators in order to ensure that they are going to accept the MGA license in their different jurisdictions. And it often requires a lot of lengthy discussions because it's important for them to understand that their existing regulatory frameworks never consider the type of technological innovation that DFS represents. We are doing something that is different, that wasn't contemplated at the time of drafting that legislation, and oftentimes they don't quite understand it. So we have the opportunity to sit with them, educate them about our product and our business and our revenue models, and then to hopefully work to get some type of formal agreement that we're able to operate there under our Malta license. A really good win for us recently that is worth sharing is that in Ireland, we participated in a tax strategy review from the Irish Revenue, where we submitted detailed documentation around all of those things I just said, and upon reviewing it, they agreed that we were not sports betting, which is all we wanted from them, and now we are able to operate legally and clearly under that license from Malta into Ireland. And that was a good achievement for us. But it's not just winning with the regulators and the legislators, which is a challenge for us. Beyond that, it's also talking with the gatekeepers. And I use the funny image over there of, there is no Dana, only Zool. For those of you who may be Ghostbusters fans, there's at least one in the audience, good. The gatekeepers are the people who I refer to as the payment providers and the marketing channels who are critical for modern businesses to grow in those markets. More specifically, that's Google, Facebook, Twitter, people where you're putting display advertising, PPC, retargeting, and also the payment providers like PayPal. And for them, they are not willing to take any regulatory or compliance risks whatsoever. We have to make them comfortable with the category of regulation we're entering into any market with. So we sit with them, we explain our business, how it works, what the local regulations are. We speak with the regulators as well. And the regulators oftentimes are coming from a point of view that is not necessarily steeped in gaming. In Ireland, for example, the people at the Department of Justice are responsible for gaming as well as the coroner's office, which is a unique mix that I've seen in that framework. So by working with all these stakeholders on education, we get them over the line. Ireland is somewhere where PayPal are now agreeing to process daily fantasy sports transactions, which is wonderful. But we don't yet have Google or Facebook on board because they don't yet accept that view. So while there are 15 operators licensed by the MGA under the Controlled Skill Games framework today, there are limitations in respect to markets where those licenses can be used. In many cases, it's a national regulatory framework which needs to be embraced. And sometimes those national regulatory frameworks don't contemplate our category. And even those that are emerging, such as in the Netherlands and in Sweden, while we have been doing what we can to help share information about our category, it's difficult to say what may happen in the future as these new regimes emerge. So it's really important for those operators in the room who are looking to establish opportunities for themselves in the future to engage in dialogue with the legislators and the regulators and ourselves. We have some friends in this room. We work very closely with the guys from Ooh La La and F-Sport from Sweden and a few of the other operators in respect to sharing notes about what's happening. If you look at the publicly available submissions we've sent in both Sweden and Ireland, you can see the co-signatories of these submissions in order to understand who is working with us. And I welcome all of you to approach myself or Valerie or Ben from Ooh La La afterwards if you'd like to be participating in these efforts with us. In respect to innovation, we all know what daily fantasy sports are. I won't go through a tutorial on that. We had the lovely Ooh La La video earlier. But one of the things that DraftKings is doing is recognizing that there is a lot of skill required in order to be able to successfully play daily fantasy sports. And in some cases, that level of skill is slightly intimidating for new players in order to get them to come and play. And they're not only intimidated by the complexity of a product, perhaps, but also by the specter of playing people they don't know from all over the world. So what we've done is we've invested in creating a new private leagues feature. It encourages social play amongst individuals and all of their friends in order to create private leagues. They can also play the public contests, but by being able to play privately, we've been able to see a lot of new players come into our platform and then migrate from these private leagues into public leagues. Another thing we've done is we recently created some game variants based on our traditional games. So we have a 4-day golf set, which is something, this is our classic game, where you're selecting 10 players from a different league in order to play. We also have created recently an arcade mode, where instead of having to do the research to draft 10 players for a daily fantasy sports contest lineup, instead you can just draft 6 players, which lowers the bar somewhat on the amount of work that is involved in order to create a successful DFS contest. You still have to do your research to be competitive, but it's a little easier to participate. On weekend golf, so today we have golf contests which run across 4 days, and we created a shorter version of that which just runs across 2 days. And that's something that also encourages repeat engagement amongst the players who may have drafted people on the Thursday who are no longer in competition but still want to be playing with their friends, as well as because what we do is we make sports better. We make consuming sports better. You know, if you're watching it on TV and you're playing in our lineup and you're playing with your friends, it creates a really great, exciting social engagement layer on top of the consumption that you're having either in a stadium or inside a pub or at home on the couch with your friends. Another thing we've done recently, again, in line to creating a more friendly product that is easier for new players to become familiar with, is create a new Pickem Variation. And the Pickem Variation is just, it's a tiered game where what we do is we create a tier of players across 6 different levels where you pick 1 player per tier, and you know, it still requires a lot of skill for you to be successful, but it is a different approach that is a more friendly and faster UI that allows people to be able to participate in these games. And what we're seeing is the different game variations and the innovations around that format are allowing a more diverse group of players to participate in these games. And so what we're doing on new customer acquisition in new markets where people aren't yet familiar with our product is we're focusing on acquisition into something like a Pickem game because it's a bit of a lower hanging fruit to understand, to become familiar with, and to start playing. And then we'll try to cross-sell them from that product into a more complex product, because once they've really started enjoying it, they understand how much work goes into being successful. They're then more interested in playing a complementary product. But we don't limit our innovation only in respect to game formats and game variants and product. We also spend a lot of time working on community guidelines and other things that will help us make a product better for players, again, who want to make sure that they're playing in an environment that is friendly and constructive. So we put a lot of time into ensuring players can opt out of being available for head-to-head contests so that they don't feel like better players are necessarily looking for them. We also give them an opportunity to play in beginners contests of various types. So, you know, the first 50 contests you played in any sport, you can play in one of our beginner contests. It's the kind of thing that I strongly recommend operators do. And the other thing on the very right here are experience badges. So players who are very experienced will be identified as such inside any of our contests, which is something that helps them understand the skill level of people they may be playing against. Now, this was mandated for us through Massachusetts regulations for us to implement into our product, because they felt it would be something that allowed players to understand the level of skill of the players they were playing against. I believe it works the other way, because the more experienced players are then looking for players who don't have those badges. But nevertheless, we're aware of this and working to, you know, constantly create improvements in our product to create a better playing experience. So I spoke about international innovation. Now I'd just like to talk about engagement for a little while. So the key point around fantasy sports, why people should play, why the sports league should care, is because we increase engagement. A player who is playing on daily fantasy sports is more likely to be reading about a sport online, to be buying print magazines about fantasy sports. They're going to be watching more games, and they're going to be more interested in what's happening, not only with their favorite players and their favorite teams, but also all of the players across all of the teams in an entire league, because only when they understand the entire ecosystem of player performance across an entire league are they able to then make the best decisions in order to draft the right players and to compete into a contest. And because of that, because we increase the viewership numbers on TV and we get more people watching online and paying attention to sports, the sports leagues love us. Major League Soccer, the National Hockey League, and Major League Baseball have all invested in DraftKings. We have some owners of 2 of the big NFL clubs who have invested in us, and a number of other sports organizations around the world have recognized what we're doing and love it. And I encourage any of you regional operators or global operators to work closely with the sports leagues, because you drive tremendous value for them. And that value isn't just pure eyeballs, it's more specifically the demographics of what those eyeballs represent. This is a highly commercializable, if that word exists, audience of people who are a prime demographic that are typically male, have a high disposable incomes, and just love watching these sports. And here's some data on what a DraftKings user looks like. I encourage you to run your own surveys and understand what your databases look like. One of the things we do in the United States, specifically in states where we do not operate for real money, is we run free contests and we sell advertising around it. It's not a tremendous part of our business, but it is definitely a growing part because advertisers nationally in America recognize the value of the demographic of our database and the size of the population and want to reach them with their messaging. I encourage you to consider some of the same. And we talk about the level of engagement and the amount of time people actually spend on a daily fantasy sports platform like DraftKings. It's tremendous. It's second only to Facebook in respect to the average monthly hours spent on the mobile and desktop per visitor. What we're doing is we're creating a new method of sports consumption. And what we're looking at doing is not only having what exists today, which is the game layer that exists in mobile and on desktop, but we're actually looking at increasing the depth and breadth of the content available on our platform. You may have read recently about a partnership we've launched into with EuroLeague basketball. That partnership is not only in respect to creating daily fantasy sports games on DraftKings, but we're going to be broadcasting all of the EuroLeague matches inside our client to our user base in the United States and Canada. And there are a lot of reasons for that, because the EuroLeague basketball have a fantastic league, and we have already seen a really good result from our players in all of our markets in respect to participating in those games. But there's also a large number of American collegiate players who are now playing in EuroLeague basketball, still follow them, and EuroLeague basketball have an opportunity to increase their broadcast reach by being available on our platform. We're at 9.2 million players today. Next year we'll be 10 million plus. Suddenly there's this tremendous opportunity to utilize our platform for creating deeper engagement and monetization of a user base. With EuroLeague basketball, all of our players have the opportunity to watch one match for free every week, and the rest of them will have to play at least one paid contest in order to see these matches. And then we have a revenue share formula with EuroLeague basketball. So while we're getting into OTT, or over-the-top broadcasting, in order to acquire these rights and make them available, we're doing so in a very different way than the traditional broadcasters or the media companies. And while we are talking about a huge number of sports that are available on our platform, our number one growing sport is football, just as it is around the world. We launched football several years ago, focusing on Premier League and Champions League to start, and over time we've added additional leagues. We've also seen Major League Soccer come on play, La Liga, and we're now running satellite qualifiers for the World Cup. We're running contests on the satellite qualifiers. You can't actually qualify for the World Cup on our platform yet, although our soccer experts would love us to make that available. And so what are the overall results of us doing this? I would say that one of the key things that's happened is we have had a direct correlation on the increase of TV viewings. And that's happened in respect to our partnership for the Canadian Football League. And we've also seen a direct correlation in respect to the increase of TV views in America for European Tour Golf. And it has to do with us launching these games and promoting them and cross-selling them from our existing database to another one. So if you're looking for some tips on opportunities to grow your business, partner with the leagues, because the leagues themselves have tremendous influence and they have a product that players love. And there's an opportunity to create a symbiotic relationship for aggregate benefit of everybody who's involved in a deal like that. So I went pretty quickly through all of that. I'd just like to say that in summary, we are still a new and growing industry. There's a handful of operators today who are active across Europe. We're very excited to see the emergence of a number of new operators, and you're going to hear about some of them later today. But there's still a lot of room to grow, not only in Europe, but around the world, and that includes North America. We have seen a few big operators start there recently. I believe we have a lot of work ahead of us still in order to increase the overall size of the market, and we're willing to do that ourselves for everybody's benefit, and we're asking for the same thing, because I feel there's a tremendous opportunity out there for us to create a really strong business for ourselves well into the future. And education is critical. We find this in every conversation we have all over the world. We've talked to Coljuegos in Colombia, we've talked to regulators all the way across Europe, we've talked to lawyers and legislators in other markets around the world, and the one thing that comes up continually is people don't know what we are. They say, oh, you're just season-long fantasy sports. You don't need a license. or you're just sports betting, just take a sports betting license. And then we have to explain that neither of these approaches are reasonable commercially, technically, from a compliance perspective. You know, I showed you the map of the United States earlier. We're regulated in 18 states, and we have a handful of licenses in other markets around the world. You know, that creates a tremendous compliance footprint and very high cost for us. Ideally, we end up in a situation where there isn't just a recognition of the Maltese license, but a mutual recognition of that, so that we don't have to create an additional layer of compliance because of the costs associated with that, as well as the complexity. So I feel that by going to the appropriate stakeholders and having these discussions well in advance, in some cases years in advance of them actually putting regulations out, we're able to help them create good frameworks for us to establish and grow our business. I do believe the opportunity for all of us is extraordinary. I ask you all to work together with DraftKings and help us seize it. Thank you very much.